Emily never thought life would slow down enough for her to hear silence the way she heard it now. It had been 2 years since her husband Michael passed away, and the house still carried the faint echoes of him, his laughter, his footsteps, the way he used to hum while fixing something in the garage. She had grown used to that silence, though it hadn't become any less heavy. Sometimes she would find herself sitting by the window in the living room with a cup of tea in her hands, staring out at the garden and wondering what life was supposed to look like now. She had her own routines, her job at the local library, and a circle of supportive friends, but deep inside there was still a space she hadn't figured out how to fill. Michael's son, Daniel, visited her more often now than he had in the first year after the funeral. He was in college, studying fine arts, and though he had always been quiet and reserved, he seemed to open up more whenever he was surrounded by paints and brushes. Emily had known him since he was 10, and while she wasn't the kind of woman who forced herself into the role of mom, she cared for him deeply, respecting the space he needed and offering support when he asked. Over the years, their bond had become something soft and steady, like an old quilt that held warmth even in its worn spots. On one late summer afternoon, Emily sat flipping through an old photo album. The edges of the pictures had curled slightly over the years, but the images were still vibrant. Michael holding Daniel's hand at a fair, the two of them fishing by the lake, all of them together at Thanksgiving dinners. She smiled at one picture where Michael had his arm around both of them, his grin wide and eyes sparkling. She touched the photo gently, wishing for just one more day like that. From across the room, Daniel looked up from his sketchbook. He had been sitting on the floor, papers spread around him like a circle of thoughts. He noticed her gaze lingering on the picture, and, for a moment, he saw not just Emily, but the depth of strength she carried. She didn't crumble when Michael died. She carried on, carefully and quietly, finding little ways to make each day meaningful. That resilience fascinated him, and he had been searching for something to paint that wasn't just another landscape or faceless figure. "Emily," he said suddenly, his voice breaking the quiet. She looked up, surprised by the seriousness in his tone. "Yes?" she asked, setting the album aside. "Would you sit for a portrait?" "For me." His eyes held both nervousness and hope, as though he feared she might say no. Emily blinked. "Me? You want to paint me?" Daniel nodded. "I can't explain it, but I feel like I need to. You've been strong in ways I can't put into words. Maybe I can put it on canvas instead." For a moment, Emily didn't know what to say. She wasn't used to being the center of attention, much less the subject of a painting. But the sincerity in his expression moved her, and she realized it wasn't about vanity. It was about connection, about preserving something real. She gave a soft smile. "All right. If you really think I'd make a good muse, then yes." The next day, Daniel set up his easel in the living room, near the big window where sunlight streamed in. Emily wore a light blouse and sat in a wooden chair, her posture natural but dignified. At first, she felt self-conscious, wondering if she should adjust her hair or sit differently, but Daniel assured her to just be herself. "Don't try too hard," he said with a grin. "The best portraits come when the subject is simply them." Hours passed quietly as Daniel worked, his brush moving across the canvas, his eyes shifting between her and his painting with careful focus. Emily watched him sometimes, fascinated by the way his hands moved, the way his brow furrowed when he concentrated. She had always known he loved art, but seeing him so absorbed made her appreciate his passion in a new light. During breaks, they talked. He asked her about stories from her younger years, about her favorite books, about moments she remembered with Michael. She answered honestly, and in return, he shared bits about his life at college, how competitive his classes were, how he sometimes doubted himself, how art was both a blessing and a struggle. In those hours, sitting across from each other, something gentle unfolded between them. Not romance, not anything forbidden, but a deeper understanding of who they were and how grief had shaped them. By the third session, the portrait had begun to take life. Emily saw the outline of her face, the softness of her eyes, and she was startled by how much of her inner self Daniel had managed to capture. It wasn't just her likeness, it was her resilience, her sorrow, her quiet strength. One evening, as she stood up to stretch, she glanced at the canvas and felt her throat tighten. Daniel, that's me. But it's also more than me. He looked at the painting, then back at her. It's how I see you. You've been through so much, but you keep going. That's something worth painting. Tears welled in her eyes, but they weren't heavy tears. They were the kind that came with gratitude, with being seen. For so long she had carried her strength alone, never realizing how much it showed to those around her. When the portrait was finally finished, Daniel hesitated before showing her the last brushstroke. He wanted it to be perfect, not in detail but in feeling. When he turned the easel toward her, Emily gasped softly. The woman in the painting wasn't flawless, but she was radiant in her humanity. She looked like someone who had endured storms, yet still found light. Emily placed a hand on his shoulder. Daniel, it's beautiful. You made me see myself differently. Thank you. They decided to hang the painting in the living room, above the fireplace where Michael's photo once stood. It didn't replace him, but it added to the story of their family, showing that healing and love could continue even after loss. That evening, as the sun dipped and golden light filled the room, Emily and Daniel sat side by side, looking at the portrait. For the first time in years, Emily felt something ease inside her, a sense of peace, of acceptance, of connection. And Daniel knew he had created not just a piece of art, but a bond that would last forever.